We're not training to become better at exercise. We have to become better at life. And we have to be able to squat. We have to be able to get up off the floor. We have to be able to climb a set of stairs. We have to be able to interface with the world in a way that allows for long-term success and health. Protein should be ingested in discrete meals. How do we pick foods that will allow us to get the most amount of nutrition with the least amount of calories? And also, how are you going to design a diet that supports aging where it's something you don't have to think about? You have to prioritize resistance training if you want to age well.
Welcome back to the Rena Malik MD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rena Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon. Today, our guest is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. She is a board-certified physician with a fellowship in nutritional sciences as well as geriatrics from Washington University. She's also the best-selling New York Times author of Forever Strong, a science-based strategy for aging well. Not only is she a tremendous individual and human and mother, she's also a leading expert in optimizing muscle for combating disease and optimizing longevity. She herself has a wonderful podcast called The Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show that can be found on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. She's also got a social media presence on Instagram, YouTube, and a multitude of other platforms. Today, we talked about the importance of skeletal muscle, how muscle is the biggest endocrine organ we have, and how it's important for preventing disease and living a long and healthy life. We talked about exactly how much protein you should be taking and what kind of sources of protein you should be really optimizing. And really importantly, we debunked so many important myths, such as you can only digest so much protein, or protein is bad for your kidneys. We also talked about the different sources of protein, as I mentioned before, including animal-based proteins versus plant-based proteins, and what are the issues with the science related to animal-based proteins. And lastly, we talked about how to incorporate resistance training in your life, and Dr. Lyon shared her own diet that she typically uses on a daily basis to maintain muscle health. I hope you guys enjoy. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, thank you so much for joining us.
I can't wait.
Well, I'm joining you, but as you can tell online, we're in Dr. Lyon's studio.
I was going to say, I really love your studio. It's got this nice little flair.
Yeah, it's perfect.
A little dark and moody.
So first up, before we start, I just want to say how amazing of a person you are. And I don't think people realize how hard it is to do what you do. You podcast. You make social content. You take care of patients. You are a mom of 2 young kids and a wife. And you're doing it all. And you're working out. And you're doing all the things. You're living the life that you talk about. And that is amazing.
Oh, that actually means a lot that you recognize that. And in full disclosure, we did do push-ups before we started podcasting.
We did. And it was actually really fun.
And we probably should have done it before this episode too, but we can do it after.
We're good. So for those of you who don't know, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon coined the term muscle-centric medicine. And in medical school, we don't learn about muscle, not in the context of the way you've taught about it online. So I want to know your journey. Like, how did you get here?
Yeah, well, I'm so excited to be able to share it with a fellow physician. It didn't happen by accident, but I think that we all have in our career one pivotal moment that changes everything. In fairness, I studied nutritional sciences. I studied nutritional sciences as an undergraduate, and I landed in a man named Dr. Donald Lehman's class. And for people interested in nutrition and protein, he's the guy. He is a world-class expert in nutritional sciences. Taught me all about protein, all about muscle, and it was so fascinating to see early on an expert and a very creative thinker in science, which I would say that we don't often see. And because of that, I went into medical school, I studied nutritional sciences, and then I went back and I did a fellowship. I did a fellowship in geriatrics and nutritional sciences. And at the time, you have worked in academic medicine. At the time, the job of the fellow, and I did a combined fellowship. So I did combined research and clinical practice. And that's why the geriatric fellowship was 2 years. And we were looking at body composition and brain function. And I fell in love with this one participant. Again, we all have that moment. She was a mom of 3 in her mid-50s. And she always struggled with weight. And I imaged her brain. And her brain looked like the beginning of an Alzheimer's brain. And I was like, what are we doing wrong? This woman had followed the advice that she'd been given. She'd been given by us as medical providers, which was eat less, do more cardiovascular activity, eat a low-fat diet, all of the things. She had yo-yo dieted her muscle away, destroyed her metabolism, and in the process, really destroyed her brain. And it was at that moment that everything kind of came together. This idea that muscle was only about fitness and being jacked, and the idea that we had been fighting an obesity epidemic for 50 years and people were only getting sicker. Mm-hmm. And I realized that we were focusing on the wrong tissue and that all of these patients didn't have an obesity problem. One could argue, yes, obesity is a problem, but at the core was they were under-muscled. They actually had a skeletal muscle problem.
So how did you discover that? So I understand the concept that muscle is under-recognized as an organ, right? We think of it as just there, right, to help us move. But like, how did you come to that realization that it was the under-muscle problem?
Again, a lot of clinical experience, and then just looking back at the literature. That, again, in medicine, we are taught in a way that is very algorithmic. And that if you actually look back in the literature and you look at skeletal muscle as an organ system, one would argue that the diseases of metabolism, many of them begin in skeletal muscle. This, you'll see early Gerald Shulman's work. There's a ton of pioneering work that really point to skeletal muscle as a primary problem. DeFranzo, he's here in not Houston, which I wish, but in Texas, that really skeletal muscle insulin resistance and the health of skeletal muscle is the primary point of entry to metabolic problems.
So let's break it down. How is skeletal muscle as an endocrine organ, how does it relate to brain health, to insulin resistance, to obesity and metabolic problems?
Maybe even sexual health.
Yeah.
You could throw sexual health in there.
Absolutely.
Skeletal muscle is, by mass, the largest organ in the body. It makes up 40%. I don't know, maybe our husbands, maybe 50%. Who knows? They could be really jacked. But skeletal muscle in and of itself has many actual roles in the body. Number one, it is the metabolic sink. And when I say metabolic sink, we talk a lot about carbohydrates. And the primary site of disposal of carbohydrates is skeletal muscle. This would be in an exercise state and or a non-exercise state, so a sedentary state. Mm-hmm. Skeletal muscle is the primary site, 80 to 90% disposal of carbohydrates. And that becomes very important, especially when you think about insulin resistance, obesity, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, all diseases that in part have a metabolic dysregulation. Skeletal muscle is the primary site. Beyond that, when you think about skeletal muscle as an amino acid reservoir, we go through periods of fasting. Skeletal muscle is the storage site of proteins in the body. Your body will pull from skeletal muscle to get these amino acids for recovery, repair in post-surgical patients, in cancer, in sepsis, you name it. Skeletal muscle, the more healthy skeletal muscle mass you have, the greater your survivability. It also interfaces with the immune system. Exercising skeletal muscle releases myokines. These are peptides. There are hundreds of these that travel throughout the body. They affect the brain, the bone. It's the way in which our organ systems crosstalk. It's the inter-organ crosstalk. And of course, body armor. If you fall, survivability from a fall, mobility, strength, all the other aspects of skeletal muscle that we would think about. And those, when you think about the primary buckets that skeletal muscle plays in life, it is really responsible for our interface with the world.
Yeah, so these myokines, they're essentially signaling molecules,
Exactly.
right? So they tell us, we can sense sort of, from what I read in your book, you can sense insulin sensitivity, you can sense blood sugar from the myokine signaling. Is that right?
Yes, in part. And actually, this brings me to another point that I failed to mention, which I think will probably be a focal point of our conversation, is that skeletal muscle is a nutrient sensing organ. It senses the quality of the diet, and it's primarily sensitive to amino acids. And the myokine interface is fascinating because let's take, for example, interleukin 6, which is one, or interleukin 15. These are myokines that are released directly related to exercise, intensity, and duration. Now, the listener might be thinking, well, wait a second. I thought that these are cytokines. Mm-hmm. And that's another inflammatory peptide that signals inflammation in the body. And those are peptides that are released from the immune system. Mm-hmm. But depending on the cell in which these myokines or cytokines are coming from, really determine whether something is inflammatory or essentially anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, so how do we keep our skeletal muscle healthy? So I think obviously you can think about exercise, but there's more to it than that.
There is. And what's so fascinating is skeletal muscle declines as we age, unfortunately. And I think that we've all seen this, whether we've seen our parents become tinier, a little bit more frail. And potentially, is that because there's a nutritional aspect? Probably. And also a movement aspect. This idea that we have an opportunity to be sedentary. 50% of Americans, they don't even exercise.
I'm sure it's actually higher than that.
Yeah. Well, 70% don't meet all of the requirements. So that's the 2 days a week of resistance training plus cardiovascular activity. Nobody's meeting that.
Yeah.
And what's so fascinating is the idea of being sedentary is actually a disease state. One thing that we think about the health of skeletal muscle is it requires this flux. We've all heard about the storage form of carbohydrates, which is glycogen. There are a whole host of things that build up in skeletal muscle. For example, I hate to say it, but we've all had a marbled steak. That marbling is fat infiltration, connective tissue. So a ribeye steak might be great on your plate, but those same things happen to skeletal muscle. And when you think about how we keep skeletal muscle healthy, I think the first thing to recognize is that building and maintaining as much muscle as you can when you're younger. We both have children. The more active that those children are, the better it's going to be to set them up for success, for metabolic success, but for also the ability to continue activity. We have tendons attached to bone and muscle. The quality of those tendons, especially as we age, change. And when we think about what are the things that limit activity, a lot of times it's tendinopathy or tendon pain, and understanding that we have to build and maintain the strength of both muscle, bone, and tendons. It's crucial.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. My husband is a PM&R doctor.
I know, you mentioned.
And he, when you have an injury, if it's, if you want to avoid surgery, like say I actually had a labral tear, and the recommendation is to actually strengthen the muscles around the injury so that you can reduce your pain, right? And continue to allow that area to heal. And it works, right? Like I'll tell you firsthand, it works, but I don't even tell you, you can ask any rehab doctor and they'll tell you normal function leads to normal recovery. And so actually rehabbing those muscles or working those muscles out is very beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating that the idea of muscle-centric medicine hasn't been coined or thought about in that way before. Because I think, oftentimes when we think about muscle, we do think about athletic activity. Mm-hmm. We think about performance or optimization. And when we talk about it in the paradigm of optimization, I think it misses the mark. Because there's a lot of people that are out there. Again, we already know that most people aren't exercising. And then if we focus on optimization, that turns away a lot of people because they're just trying to get through their day, or they've tried 500 different diets and they don't know. And by focusing on skeletal muscle health, it really will change the trajectory of an individual's life for a number of reasons. Activities of daily living. You're a surgeon. One of the most commonly used interventions is bed rest.
Mm-hmm. Well, not anymore. Not.
I know.
Yeah.
I was just talking to some other surgeons, and that seems to have changed.
Yeah, no more bed rest.
But how long did it take to change, and when did it change?
There's still some old surgeons who will, at least after reconstructive surgery, still put people on bed rest for days. And fortunately, we've now realized that there's actually no merit to that in terms of healing. It doesn't actually change the healing process. It probably hinders it.
It actually makes it worse.
Yeah.
I mean, there's data to support that an individual 5 days, 7 days of bed rest, they'll lose 3 pounds of muscle.
That's crazy. I mean, and think about it now, we actually see it, right? If someone is moving after surgery, if they're walking after surgery, if they're like, first of all, their bowel functions return better, if they're having any abdominal surgery, but also on top of it, they're feeling better. Like they're actually moving better, feeling better. Their pain is less. There's so many consequences to that. But I don't know where it became so, everyone has to be so cautious. about like, oh, I'm going to hurt myself.
No.
Like I was just at the gym with my dad this week, and I was like, okay, let's lift together. And I had him lift a little bit, and he did like 5 reps and was like, okay, I'm done. And I was like, what do you mean you're done? And he's like, I don't want to hurt myself. And I was like, okay, go lighter. Like just do a little bit. And he's like, okay, I'm going to work on it, you know, but he was very scared of me. He's 77 now, and he's scared. He's scared of getting hurt. And I think a lot of people are very cautious. Like they're worried about hurting themselves.
I couldn't agree with you more. And the way that I have begun to counsel patients about it and just talk to the general population is, think about it. How much does a toddler weigh? 40, 50 pounds? A grandparent probably has no issue picking up a toddler, a screaming child. And I know as moms, we don't. I mean, am I throwing them overhead? No, not on a good day. And we have to understand that just because it's a weight in the gym, we're not training to become better at exercise. We have to become better at life. And we have to be able to squat. We have to be able to get up off the floor. We have to be able to climb a set of stairs. We have to be able to interface with the world in a way that allows for long-term success and health. And I think part of that is getting a very well-defined program. If you are going into the gym without a plan, it's a problem. If you are going to the gym without thinking, okay, and again, there's so many resources now online, is it how do we continuously progress? Does a person need to increase volume? Do they need to increase intensity? What are the metrics that they can, fall on, to, no pun intended, to fall back on?
We don't want to fall. That's the whole point.
Right.
That's the whole point of doing this.
Exactly. If an individual falls, between 12 and 30% of individuals, I mean, that's like a death sentence.
Yeah, especially if you fracture a hip.
If you fall and you fracture a hip, the chances are you will not regain normal function. That's not good. And also the metabolic effects. It creates a downward cascade of everything. But anyway, back to the idea of what does someone need to do? So practical tips of someone who's watching this and said, you know what? I have never trained a day in my life. I would say, okay, well, the best time to start, or at least worry about it, was yesterday, or you could start today. But either way, you have to get moving. And very simply, you could do 2 days a week of training. 2 days a week of training would be enough to maintain the skeletal muscle mass that you have. But you
lose some skeletal muscle mass over years, right?
Yeah. So the numbers are between 3 to 8% per decade. Arguably, I think it's much higher.
3 to 8% per decade is a lot.
I know.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So if you don't do some form of resistance training, you are going to lose skeletal muscle every 10 years. And every year, but really at a large rate every 10 years. And you're not going to be able to lift your grandkid or get up off the ground or be able to catch your kid when they're running at you.
Or what about if you fall?
If you trip, you won't be able to catch yourself.
That's right. And I think that we underestimate it. Do you know that sarcopenia, which is a decrease in muscle mass and function, was classified as a disease 2016? 2016.
That's crazy.
That's insanity. And do you know that
I think sexual health was considered a condition long before that.
And there is probably some interface between the two. And when you think about it, we have not done a good job at testing skeletal muscle mass. And I think that now as we begin to actually test the actual tissue, we're going to find that those rates are much higher. It's mass and strength. So typically when you think about how does someone test for how much muscle mass they have, this is done through DEXA. Mm-hmm. DEXA actually doesn't look at lean mass or skeletal muscle mass directly.
It's calculated, right?
It's calculated. Mm-hmm. It looks at bone and it looks at fat mass. Everything else is considered lean tissue. Of that lean tissue, 40% might be muscle. It doesn't talk about the quality of the tissue, if there's fat infiltration, and it doesn't even give us a direct measure. And the variability of testing on a DEXA or say an in-body, a bioimpedance, there's a lot of variability and there's a high error rate. And when you think about it, as individuals age, it becomes more and more difficult to detect meaningful changes in lean mass. Mm. And so now we have a large body of evidence that has really disassociated muscle mass and strength. So people will say, and so let me frame this up, because inevitably people that are listening have heard this, that muscle mass doesn't matter. The amount you have doesn't matter as long as you're strong. But that's not true. And when we begin to look at skeletal muscle mass directly, there's a new technique that's now been validated. It's called a D3 creatine, which is a tagged creatine to look at directly how much skeletal muscle mass someone has. they are finding that actually mass and strength are highly correlated. And one more thing, because we're talking about a little bit of body composition, the loss of muscle is more impactful than the gain of body fat.
The loss of muscle is more impactful than the gain of body fat
when it comes to clinical outcomes that we care about, which again are blood sugar regulation, hypertension, these issues that are related to metabolism, because skeletal muscle mass is so important as the metabolic driver, the metabolic sink. When we lose skeletal muscle mass, you have increasing levels of insulin resistance. You have increasing levels of blood glucose, which we know blood glucose is toxic. We need it, but can't just hang around in the bloodstream at high levels. And so we have to really begin to refocus on the importance of the health of skeletal muscle. And quite frankly, the idea about skeletal muscle as an organ system has been around for quite some time. But just like with sexual health, we're still in its infancy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality of it.
Are you sick of going to the doctor only to have them talk at you for 15 minutes and leave without knowing exactly why they're prescribing you this certain medication and what exactly the next step is to take to optimize your health? Wouldn't it be great to finally find a doctor who actually listens to you, answers your questions, and doesn't rush you out the door? Well, at my practice, Rena Malik MD, I aim to do just that. I specialize in taking care of patients who have issues with their sex lives, issues with their bladder, with their hormone health, or are having pain in their pelvic region or with sex. My goal is to give you the time and attention you deserve so you can leave with a clear understanding of your condition as well as our treatment plan that's optimized for your goals. During your visit, I'm 100% present with you for an entire hour. And after you leave, you can reach me. It is super easy to send me a message through our secure portal, and I'll get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. No questions asked, no hidden fees. Scheduling is easy. Just visit our website, renamalikmd.com/appointments. We see patients in both Irvine and Beverly Hills, California, and I see patients virtually in California, Florida, Illinois, Maryland, New York, New Jersey, and Virginia. Oh, and don't forget Texas. If you're outside these states, consider seeing me for an educational visit. I look forward to seeing you. So I want to basically summarize it for the audience. I think what you're saying is that skeletal muscle, improving the health of your skeletal muscle through resistance training and nutrition, which we're going to talk about, is going to reduce your risk of a number of diseases like diabetes, like Alzheimer's, like high cholesterol, like high blood pressure, and help you prevent falls and live a high quality of life as you're aging.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sold.
Right? I mean, if you're listening and you don't feel like, oh, I need to start lifting weights or doing some form of resistance training, then I'm not sure what else would sell you.
Right. And to be clear, all activity is good. But I refrain from saying the activities that we should be doing, like walking, would be enough to support aging. So that would not be true. And I think that we have to really push ourselves to a higher standard of activity if we are going to combat aging.
Yeah, and walking is great. It's wonderful, but you need to have some resistance strain on your muscles.
I want to mention something that I think is really important to say here is that while walking is beneficial, it does nothing to support type 2 muscle fibers. Type 2 muscle fibers are those bigger, bulky fibers that we use when we think about strength, when we think about hypertrophy. You need to maintain those as you age. And walking is not going to provide enough of a stimulus to maintain the quality of those fibers.
Yeah. It's good cardiovascular exercise to start,
Sure.
To start with if you're not doing anything. You do mention 5 ways to make muscle magic in your book.
Yes.
And I think that I loved it because it's so approachable for someone who's done nothing. So can you share those?
Yes. Well, hopefully I can remember them. And I might not be able to, but I will tell you one that I use every day. And that is, and we kind of did it.
Yeah.
It's movement throughout the day. So let's say you have, some food, do 10 squats. 10 air squats, 10 push-ups. If you're like me, you might do 500. No, I'm just kidding. Not really. But getting movement throughout the day is really critical because, again, when we start the conversation, what does muscle do? It is the primary site for glucose disposal. And when you are exercising, you don't require insulin. You can move glucose out of the bloodstream into tissues without leveraging insulin. And over time, what is insulin? It's a peptide hormone released from the pancreas, which when we're not growing up, it's going to make us grow out.
Yeah.
And that's one way to make muscle magic. What were the other ways? I don't even know if I remember the other 5 ways.
I have to pull it up. Well, I think you bring up a good point, which is after you eat, if you do movement, you're going to see a reduction. Your insulin is going to be reduced, right? So that's great
and potentially glucose as well. And if you use a continuous glucose monitor, you'll see it in real time, which is extraordinary because you're proving it to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You've talked about dietary protein a lot, and it's
really,
yeah, and how it is extremely important for our muscle health. So let's talk about what is the optimal amount of protein and macronutrient sort of profile for a person who's looking to optimize their muscular health.
Yes, this is probably my favorite topic, and I've been talking about it for 20 years. And surprisingly, you would think I would be sick of talking about it. No. But I'm actually not, because here's why. You were on my podcast and we were chatting, and I think being a physician is a privilege. And I think being a well-trained physician is a privilege. And I have a unique perspective because I trained in nutritional sciences for 7 years and also trained as a geriatrician. For those listening, it's typically over the age of 65. It is all about muscle health and aging, those things. I mean, we do this in clinic as just metrics. And dietary protein is probably the most controversial nutrition topic.
We're going to cover some of those myths. But
we're going to talk about, well, what is protein? Well, protein, we don't actually need protein. We need the amino acids. There's 20 different amino acids, 9 of which are essential, all of which have various needs. They are not, there's limiting amino acids, and they're not equally limiting. And why this is important is because when it comes to muscle health, we're going to, I'm sure, talk about leucine, which is one of the amino acids necessary for muscle health. But I'm going to frame up for the listener the one thing that they can do. And that is, they're going to think this is too much, but just hang with me here. 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. That's on the high end. And people are going to think 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. Well, what's my ideal body weight? The last time you felt great. And maybe that was college. I don't know. But it's something very simple to do. Now, I think it's also important to mention that people have probably heard about the RDA, which is the recommended dietary allowance. That number is set to prevent deficiencies. That number is 0.8 grams per kilogram. That comes out to 0.37 grams per pound. So let me put this in perspective. If you are a 115-pound person, that's 45 grams of protein. That's the minimum to prevent deficiencies.
We don't want to be minimum.
No, and that's a really great point. That is not actually going to support aging. And these recommendations haven't changed for decades.
It's not going to be growing our skeletal muscles, which is what we need to do to prevent that decline,
That's
right?
exactly right.
Yeah.
And something else happens. It's also important to recognize that that minimum was also based on high quality proteins. So the sources of proteins, and they were considered, so what we consider a high quality protein is something that comes from animal-based sources, not for any other reason other than hard, fast biological numbers. And so that minimum of 0.8 grams per kilogram comes from high quality proteins. And I think that that's important to mention because as individuals move more plant-based, you have to recognize that you're going to need more total protein to account for
the missing amino acids.
The amino acids, the bioavailability, those kinds of things.
So let's talk about some of the misconceptions that people have.
All of them?
Yes. One is, the big ones.
Okay.
So I can't digest that much protein.
So yes, and I don't know where this came from,
I don't know either.
But this is this idea that would be the same as saying, well, I can't metabolize that much testosterone. Well, you metabolize in some way or another all the testosterone in your body. It's being utilized for something. Okay, could it be bound? Yes, but your body is going to utilize it all. The idea that you can only absorb or digest 30 grams of protein, there's no evidence to support that. You digest and absorb all the protein that you ingest. The question then becomes, where does that excess protein go and what is the benefit? Above, say, 55 grams of dietary protein at one meal, and you could think about that as a 6-ounce steak or 6.5 or 7-ounce steak. Your body will max out its effect on skeletal muscle at around 55 grams, but the rest is still utilized, whether it's for tissue turnover, whether it's for hormone production, you name it, but the body uses all of it.
And what about the misconception that protein is bad for my kidneys?
There have been multiple meta-analyses saying and showing that actually supports healthy kidney function.
All right. The other one that comes up often is you shouldn't eat that much if you're not using it. Like if you're not training and say you're just living your regular daily life, like there's no need for that much protein because I'm not going to the gym.
Right. And I would say as you age, the tissue changes and it becomes something called more anabolically resistant, and it becomes less sensitive to the signaling of dietary protein. And when you think about it, the way to overcome that is through increasing dietary protein. And the evidence supports double the RDA for a more optimal level, 1.6 grams per kilogram. And that's actually the minimum that I would recommend individuals ingest. And that's closer to 0.7 grams per pound. So you're, upticking higher amounts of protein. Because you have to understand, why are we eating protein? We're eating protein because we have to support overall protein turnover. Protein turnover is not just muscle, it's everything. And the body turns over around 300 grams a day. And we only eat, the average male eats about 100 grams of protein a day.
So the body, I just want to make sure people heard that. The body turns over 300 grams of protein a day.
That's right. And we are eating, so the average woman will eat 68 grams of protein, and the average male will eat about 100 grams of protein.
Yeah, and I will say I've been weighing my foods more recently, and you'd be shocked at how little we actually so you go out to eat and you order say anything with chicken or beef or whatever. It's not a lot. The amount of protein you're getting is really small.
I know. And we have to think that when you eat a protein forward diet, you protect skeletal muscle. There's only two major ways to stimulate skeletal muscle. Number one, through exercise, which is arguably the most effective just because of the mechanical loading and the cascade of events that happen after that. But the other way to stimulate skeletal muscle is through diet. And that's something that 100% of people do, is they eat.
Yeah.
And so you have to get that right. If you do nothing else, you have to create a foundation of a nutritional plan that is going to support aging. And also on the contrary, you hear a lot of longevity experts talking about reducing dietary protein. Nothing could be more harmful to aging than reducing dietary protein.
Yeah, where did they get that from?
Some not great science, but also this idea that it suppresses a pathway called this mTOR pathway, but it's not based in human data.
Yes.
And also, as practicing physicians, we have to think, okay, what does support health? Skeletal muscle mass supports health. If you recommend below the RDA, which we've already established is the minimum to prevent a deficiency, some longevity experts recommend 0.3 grams per kilogram.
You're not even preventing deficiency at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is a huge myth. So maybe calorie restriction is a benefit, but again, the lower your calories get, the higher your protein intake needs to be. Again, the body turns over 300 grams of protein a day.
So even if you're not doing resistance training, protein intake in and of itself is going to support skeletal muscle.
And in fact, we have used something called the protein sparing modified fast. Individuals that had to go through surgery or bariatric surgery, you name it, that needed to really affect body composition and maintain muscle mass and lean tissue, which also includes bone. Dietary protein is essential for that. You are not going to maintain those tissues, even with a tremendous amount of exercise, if you do not have protein on board, because you need those building blocks. You need those individual amino acids.
So what I want to talk about before we talk about animal-based protein, there's a couple of things that you've mentioned that I've heard about. One is that actually eating more protein will improve your willpower. So people are always want to lose weight, right? The large majority of the country wants to lose weight. So if you tell me eating more protein is going to help my willpower to calorie restrict and lose weight, that's really powerful.
It is. I've been in the nutrition space for 20 years. And one of the things that we always talk about is how do we design a diet so individuals are not suffering? Because for whatever reason, people find that hunger is an emergency, which, as we know, that's not. Maybe having to go to the bathroom on an airplane while you're strapped in and there's turbulence, that might be an emergency, but hunger is not an emergency. And one of the ways in which you design a diet is how do you affect gut hormones? How do you affect brain? And the way in which you do that in an effective way is through increasing dietary protein. And some of the early work came out of Heather Leidy's lab. And basically, she looked at younger adolescents and she increased the dietary protein between 35 to 40 grams at that first meal at breakfast. And what they found was on brain imaging is that next meal, individuals were much less likely to pick up cake or something sweet. The reward systems in the brain were not activated. So there's a satiating mechanism with dietary protein. Again, you're hearing a lot of discussion around GLP-1s, but other hormones like CCK from the gut. These are an effective way to increase satiation just by increasing dietary protein. It's very difficult to overeat dietary protein for this reason.
Yeah, I've heard you say it before, but like if you're hungry and you sit down with a chicken breast and you don't eat it, that means you're not hungry.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that is the ultimate. But, you might sit down with a bag of popcorn. You're like, popcorn or chicken breast. Which one are you going to go for?
Yeah.
If you're not hungry, there's no way you're going to eat that dried chicken breast.
Yeah, but if you're hungry, you'll eat anything.
Or if you're eating for hedonic reasons, which people eat for a lot of other reasons other than hunger. And there's something very interesting called the protein leverage hypothesis. I don't know if you've heard about it. And it's really fascinating. And this is that the human, and actually across animal species, will eat to a certain level of protein. And it comes out to be roughly 20% protein. Maybe a little bit less, but one of the reasons why this group, and it's Simpson and his colleague, believed that obesity has become such a problem is because of the ultra-processed foods and the high palatable foods and less protein intake that people will continue to eat. This drive for food is actually a drive for amino acids.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so you course correct.
So in terms of dietary protein intake, how should you spread it out through your day?
There's a lot of contention around this topic. And I know that probably seems silly. People go from 1 meal a day to 2 meals a day. And I really fault in part my mentor, Dr. Donald Lehman, because him and Doug Patton-Jones did some of these original studies that talked about protein distribution. And protein distribution was 30 grams of protein 3 times a day. But I think it's really important to recognize the backstory as to where this came from. And what they found was initially individuals that followed a normal American eating plan, which was a low protein breakfast, we'll say 12 grams of protein, a moderate protein lunch, maybe 20 to 30 grams of protein, and a big protein dinner where you have your steak and potatoes. Those individuals that were backloading protein, when you redistributed protein to the first meal of the day and the last meal of the day, that their body composition changed by doing nothing other than redistributing the macronutrients. So I want people to take a moment and listen to this. So if you look at the studies that are isocaloric, meaning they had both groups, and I worked on some of these early studies, both groups had the same amount of calories. So let's just call it 1,500 calories. One group backloaded protein and had lower protein breakfast, moderate protein lunch, and then a high protein dinner. When you redistributed those calories from protein to that first meal of the day and equally throughout the rest of the day, they saw body composition changes, a loss in body fat and an increase in lean tissue by doing nothing else than changing the way in which they distributed the calories.
That's amazing.
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So the question becomes...
And they were measuring this with DEXA scans?
They were measuring it with DEXA scans. And then the next question is, how sensitive were those scans, right? So you need a significant amount of change to be able to, or meaningful amount of change to be able to determine outcomes, especially as individuals age. So when you have your first meal of the day between 30 to 50 grams of protein, you're coming out of an overnight fast. You stimulate the mechanisms that are responsible for muscle protein synthesis. For any physicians listening or individuals that are involved in healthcare, muscle protein synthesis is a way in which we measure, it's a biomarker for muscle health. So you either turn it on or you don't. And lower protein intakes below a certain threshold do not stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And what happens is sarcopenia, or obesogenic sarcopenia, is a huge problem. We know the majority of individuals are obese. I mean, that's crazy. The majority of our population are either overweight or obese. So if you can imagine what percentage of those individuals have healthy skeletal muscle, I would argue that the majority of them don't. And if we do not correct not just what we eat, but how we eat, the loss of skeletal muscle mass is going to be clear. But if we can redistribute protein, then you can change body outcomes. And there's one more important thing to mention about dietary protein, which I think is underappreciated, is this idea that protein has this thermic effect of food, thermic effect of feeding. So when you eat fat, you store a large majority of the fat. When you eat carbohydrates, you utilize all of it. But protein, when you eat protein in this distributed way, because it stimulates muscle, you will use 20% of that food. For example, if you have 100 calories from dietary protein and you eat between 30 and 50, I'm just picking 100, then you'll get a net gain of 80 calories because 20% of those calories will be utilized, whether it's digestion, absorption, but probably because of the stimulation of skeletal muscle. Because again, skeletal muscle is a nutrient sensing organ system. And that is practical and very easy to understand to change body composition. We haven't even talked about exercise, specifically the combination of diet and exercise.
Yeah. So you've said, and you said 30 grams 3 times, or
totally
distributed throughout three meals. I've heard you say 50 grams in the morning, 50 grams at dinner.
Yeah.
And then that's more important than the 30 throughout the day. Why is that?
Because that first and that last meal are the most important.
I understand the first meal. What I think I'm struggling with is the last meal.
Because you're going into overnight fast.
Got it.
And if you have a protein amount, especially as you age, that is sub-threshold, so let's say 20 grams of protein. And, you might hear some other protein experts say, well, that 20 grams is going to be enough. I think when an individual is aging or suffering with low levels of inflammation or obese or any kind of chronic condition, you require a certain amount of protein to stimulate that tissue. And so by dosing it appropriately, just think about how we dose medicine, we stimulate that tissue and we know that you're going into an overnight fast. And that becomes critical. You're not having ebbs and flows of blood sugar. Hopefully you shouldn't be, because part of protein will generate glucose. And you generate glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis. For every 100 grams of protein, you might generate 60 grams of carbohydrate. But it's slower, it's less efficient, and you're not dependent on dietary carbohydrates to maintain blood sugar.
Yeah, it's releasing, as you mentioned, in a more steady fashion.
Absolutely.
You're not getting those spikes.
Yeah, and you have to support whole body turnover. If you hit the health of skeletal muscle by between 30 to 50 grams of protein, everything else falls into place. Because you've now guaranteed yourself a robust amount of, again, these amino acids, which all 20 amino acids have diverse biological roles. And when you hit that, then, you hit skeletal muscle, but now you've provided your body enough to get all the other needs met.
Quick break from this episode to let you know I am so grateful that you're spending part of your day with me. I started creating content online to empower people to learn more about their bodies without needing to go see a doctor, pay a copay, wait in a waiting room, or find parking. And it has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. If you want to help support our mission of providing free education, please consider joining our premium membership. There you will have access to ad-free episodes, which are released early, as well as free transcripts and the opportunity to ask me anything. And these questions are answered in our monthly AMA episodes. Support the show and join today at renamalik.supercast.com. Can't wait to see you there. So let's say you're eating 150 grams of protein based on your ideal body weight. How much carbohydrate and how much fat should you be aiming for in relation to that?
Yeah, this is a great question. It depends, number one, how metabolically healthy you are. If you are metabolically unhealthy,
and that means diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol,
metabolic syndrome, hypertension,
overweight, obese.
Exactly. Then how I would do it is I would recognize first that the way in which you dose carbohydrates matter. Anything above, let's say between 40 and 50 grams, but we'll say 40, requires an additional insulin response. You do not want that because over 40 grams of carbohydrates now you're requiring your body to kick in and manage glucose through insulin. That should be a fail-safe mechanism, not what you are routinely doing. And that becomes important to understand. So the first thing that you do when you're planning a diet is understand how much protein you need. First, and we'll say that's 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. You're going to figure out how you're going to dose it. Again, that first meal for a 150-pound person, you could do 50 grams of protein 3 times a day. Do you have to? No. Is it advantageous if you're thinking about skeletal muscle health? Potentially, yes. The next question comes into carbohydrates. So I do better with carbohydrates. I'm very physically active. The RDA for carbohydrates is 130 grams. The average American eats 300 grams of carbohydrates a day.
I believe that.
Yes. From a practical application is understanding that you are not going to consume more than 40 grams of carbohydrates per meal. So if you say that that's 40 grams 3 times a day, that's perfectly fine. However, I would say if you are metabolically unhealthy, you could certainly make an argument to reduce those carbohydrates. You could also, on the other hand, make an argument if you're very physically active, for every hour of exercise with your heart rate over 120 beats per minute, doing moderate to vigorous activity, you could easily use between 40 and 70 grams of carbohydrates per hour. One would have to recognize that that requires activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you earn your carbohydrates. And then fat, I would say fat falls where fat falls. And I would say for your audience, a lower fat diet can affect testosterone levels. And so for men, I typically don't go below 100 grams of dietary fat. It's very interesting because we talk about diet in terms of percentages, but that's not very helpful. Because again, it all depends on protein intake and understanding that, someone might say, well, your diet is 20% protein. Well, 20% protein on a 2,000 calorie diet is going to be different than 20% protein on a 1,500 calorie diet.
Right.
So that's how I would do it. Dietary protein first, get that number correct, determine if you're metabolically healthy or unhealthy. Again, the minimum RDA is 130 grams, titrate up or down, and then fat should just fall where it falls. I never go out of my way to add in more fat because the essential fatty acid need is about 4 grams a day.
Yeah, so
It's
pretty
low.
low. So in order to determine if someone's metabolically healthy, like say they don't have any of these conditions, should they go get a DEXA scan? And what should they be looking for in numbers on the DEXA scan?
The DEXA scan is the best we have right now. A CT or MRI would be more beneficial. But again, how many of our patients are going to go get an MRI to look at muscle mass?
Yeah, not many.
No. And a CT has a risk associated with, which is radiation. An in-body is helpful, and that's a bioimpedance or a DEXA. Understanding that hydration matters, time of day matters, trying to be consistent. I think that we're a bit too liberal on what we look at for body fat percentage. So if someone is 30% body fat, that's too high. I would say also 25% is likely too high.
So consider yourself metabolically unhealthy at those percentages.
And yes, but I would say that the evidence, might say, well, 24% would be considered healthy. You really have to look at the individual. I'll give you an example. For me, I am naturally a leaner individual. 24% body fat for me would be very high.
Yeah. Well, and South Asians, we have lower targets for waist circumference and for body fat percentage to be metabolically healthy. And so I think you have to know a little bit about your body, but certainly sort of assessing how you feel too.
Yes. And here's what I would do from a number perspective. I like to see fasting insulin around 5, which is low. I like to see blood sugar. Depends, again, if it's in the 80s or 90s, blood sugar will run a little bit higher if you're eating a high protein diet. And one of the reasons is believed because the red blood cells live longer. So as long as your fasting insulin level is low and your triglycerides under 100 or less, to me, looking at that picture, that's healthy skeletal muscle. And then, of course, being strong. Could someone do an oral glucose tolerance test? Yes. Do you necessarily need to? No. And then I will say that we don't have numbers for optimal skeletal muscle mass. We could look at appendicular skeletal muscle mass index. There's ways to look at frailty. But when it comes to an optimization level, we don't have that.
Yeah, we don't have optimization level for a lot of things.
Also very true.
Like, we really don't.
That's also very true.
It's probably very individualized to some degree. I mean, maybe protein not so much, but certain things that we don't have optimization levels for, it's because it's going to be individual.
Yeah, and I'm actually really glad that you pointed that out, that dietary protein we probably vary less in. Although I will say I think that there's going to be new research coming out about the gut microbiome and certain bugs being able to generate these essential amino acids, which, by the way, that's extraordinary. So
it's probably from increased fiber intake, right? I would venture to guess.
Yes, fiber and also the bacteria breaking down. Mm-hmm. Crazy.
Yeah.
I think that we're still new to be able to say, could that mean that an individual will be able to exist on a lower protein diet? I would say probably some people, but it might be 2% of the population. But when it comes to body mass and skeletal muscle mass, it is going to be very individual. You can look at these charts, but again, my body habitus is different than yours, is different than the producers, everybody. And I think that a way to think about it is understanding where your body fat percentage is. I do think people should experiment with trying to go to the lowest body fat percentage they can while still maintaining good hormonal function.
Yes, because if you go too low,
right,
your hormones are going to suffer.
Right, and to just try it and see where they're at.
Yeah.
But clearly we know that increase in body fat percentage increases low-grade inflammation. You might see that in HSCRP, many kind of inflammatory markers, triglycerides. So understanding that healthy skeletal muscle mass, we don't have a target for it yet. But I think now with the increase in better testing, we will.
Yeah. Are you feeling in a rut in the bedroom, wishing you had the kind of sex life you could brag about? I've spent years helping patients and creating content for people all around the world to improve and optimize their sex life. Today, you can get my knowledge for 100% free with my new ebook called Better Sex, Better Life. In this ebook, I review my top 10 tips for improving your sex life, all from the comfort of your own home. All you have to do is go to renamalikmd.com/morepleasure to download it for free today. Before we move on, I want to talk about animal-based protein because there's a lot of
I know.
There's a lot of pushback on that. And so in terms of animal-based protein, people hear meat is a carcinogen. It's actually been labeled as a carcinogen. So what do we say to that?
People would have to go back to the IAR papers and actually re-examine those and understand that it's a committee. Committees also have biases. And the papers in which they threw out a ton of randomized control trials. They used a lot of epidemiology. And as you know, epidemiology is what we consider low-quality evidence. And that all the high-quality evidence that individuals have looked at, if you look at the risk ratio or relative risk, there is not an increase in cancer.
It probably depends on the type of animal protein you're intaking.
It does, whether it's processed. Again, so that's another good point. So whole foods, we don't see an increase in relative risk of cancer. Processing is a problem. There's some discussion about burning meats. That can certainly be a carcinogen. But understanding that a diet that is higher in high quality protein is not a risk.
So outside of being whole foods, what else do you consider high quality protein?
Whey protein shakes, again, because of the amino acid profile, that would be considered high quality proteins. Dairies, egg, but if you were going to think about what would be a high quality protein that is processed and easy, that would be a whey protein shake. A casein based shake, obviously you would need a little bit more, and the digestion of that is a little bit slower. You can also get higher levels of protein on a rice pea blend. Would that be considered high quality protein? Based on the definition, it would not. Again, because the high quality proteins have the amino acid profile very similar to human muscle. And that's what we need. We need these essential amino acids. So if something is low in essential amino acids, by definition, it would be considered a low quality protein. Collagen has a protein score of 0.
Yeah, I learned that from you, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And because it's very low in these branched chain amino acids and devoid of tryptophan. So that has a protein score of 0. It doesn't mean it's not helpful because, again, it's rich in glycine and proline, other amino acids, which do a number of other things that are highly beneficial. But from a skeletal muscle standpoint, it has no effect.
What about taking branched chain amino acids?
I think it's a great solution. If you are eating a lower quality diet, then adding in branched chain amino acids could be very beneficial. So for example, if someone is vegan or vegetarian, using a branched chain amino acid with a meal, I do not recommend branched chain amino acids alone, because having branched chain amino acids alone is like putting a key into a car, turning on the ignition, and then trying to press on the gas, but not having any gas in the tank. So in order to put muscle protein synthesis into effect, you need the whole spectrum of amino acids. Could there be a benefit of branched chain amino acids to just have? Certainly, but again, the human was not designed to be, how do I say this? We have a lot of variability and flexibility, but protein should be ingested in discrete meals. Shouldn't be a little bit here and there. But again, skeletal muscle as a nutrient sensing organ that has been maintained over time, it gives us clues on how we should proportion our diet.
And then I'm going to kind of lump two myths together. One is that red meat has a lot of saturated fat. And the other one is that in time and time again, studies have shown that red meat correlates. Again, these are probably epidemiological, but there's, people will say, strong evidence that red meat is correlated with a multitude of cancers.
So, or even cholesterol. I think
yes.
that's a big one. And I think it becomes really important to point out that these earlier studies didn't differentiate high protein and high fat. So a lot of the data that comes out of red meat being bad for cardiovascular disease didn't account for the fact that it's a robust amount of calories and also a lot of fat. Mm-hmm. But when you look at low protein, high quality sources, we see a number of metabolic benefits, including improvement in triglycerides, improvement in blood sugar regulation, lower levels of insulin, lower levels of blood pressure. We see time and time again that a high protein diet with a moderate amount of fat has metabolic benefits.
So for the audience who doesn't know, what are some good sources outside of the typical chicken and that people can eat that are high quality proteins, moderate amount of fat, not high saturated fat, that people can consume?
Yep. And also I do want to finish up with a cancer question, because I know that people are concerned about that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to finish that, and then I'm going to come back to the sources. When you think about cancer, you have to think, what kind of cancer are we talking about? Are you talking about prostate cancer? Are you talking about breast cancer, uterine cancer, whatever it is, lung cancer? So I think that understanding what kind of cancer we're talking about and understanding what are the actual risks that we know. Smoking and lung cancer, we know. Obesity and cancer, we know.
Very clear. Yep.
These are clear. There's mechanisms. When people say red meat and cancer, you have to give me a mechanism. What is that mechanism?
Well, people would argue it's inflammatory.
And I absolutely hear that. My question would be, we actually haven't seen that with high quality studies, high sources of protein that are low in fat and whole foods. We don't see an increase in inflammation. And I think that becomes really important to point out. The other thing with, let's say, colon cancer, one would have to ask, where's the fiber in the diet? What are the things that we know? But again, dietary protein, and especially red meat, has been the scapegoat for things for decades.
Things like obesity, lack of fiber intake.
Right. These things that we know there's a relative risk that is much higher than, and they've done the studies. So dietary protein or red meat and cancer has a relative risk of 1.2. And we know that in order for something to be meaningful, just to put this into perspective, smoking and cancer would have a relative risk of 12. Anything above 2 would be considered clinically significant, or statistically significant. We don't see that with red meat and cancer. So I just think that that's really important to point out, because the conversation is complex. And I think that we all want to age well. And I think that when you think about the big killers, you think about cancer, you think about heart disease, you think about infection, you think about falls, kidney disease. The CDC will list these diseases. But at the core, you will never see muscle mass, a decreased muscle mass on that list, and or obesity on that list. And I think it's just understanding that these big killers all have a metabolic component. And when you go back to the metabolic component, obesity is pathology and skeletal muscle is a solution. So how do we design a diet that is going to help support a lean body mass and prevent a known carcinogen like obesity?
I think what's helpful also in terms of why it's so high quality is also the amount you'd have to eat of, let's say, tofu, for example, compared to chicken.
Or 6 cups of quinoa to equal 1 small chicken breast. That becomes really important because we have to think about, so the limiting amino acids are lysine, methionine, and leucine. And leucine is what is necessary for muscle health. Now, each of these amino acids are limiting in different areas. So, for example, a vegan diet is largely a methionine restricted diet. That could be positive, it could be negative, but understanding when we think about skeletal muscle health, we have to recognize that it is not just the overall protein intake, but it is the individual amino acids. And then one step further is focusing on just protein is very myopic. There are nutrients of need that are declining in the American diet. For example, iron. For example, zinc, selenium, B vitamins. These all ride along with high quality proteins. And this comes back to this idea of what you said, the amount that you would have to consume. So what you're talking about is nutrient density. How do we pick foods as we age? Typically we eat less. How do we pick foods that will allow us to get the most amount of nutrition with the least amount of calories? And that would be very clearly things like whey protein or lean red meats. And I'll also say that you could be vegetarian or vegan and still be healthy. It just takes more effort, just understanding where the deficiencies could possibly be. And also, how are you going to design a diet that supports aging where it's something you don't have to think about? We have to be able to recognize that we live in a dynamic world.
And on those nutrient topics, we know that low zinc will cause issues with hormones.
That's right.
We know that low iron, as you mentioned earlier on our podcast, that low iron is related to female sexual dysfunction or sexual dysfunction in general, probably.
And what about pregnancy? What about anemia for young women? I mean, there are all kinds of problems that happen when you eliminate whole food groups.
Yeah. Let's give some examples of the lean red meats.
Bison is very lean. Venison. I don't know if have you ever heard of Maui Nui?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
It's amazing. Have you tried it?
I haven't tried it yet.
Well, if Matthew was paying attention, he would have sent us a lot more Maui Nui. I'm not talking about you, but Maui Nui venison is amazing, regenerative, but lean and certified Piedmontese. If you've never had that, I'd love to send some to you. These are amazing sources of lean red meats, which are incredibly valuable and also valuable for children. That's an example. Any kind of fish, I mean, aside from some of the fatty fish, lean source of protein. Eggs have about 6 grams of fat per egg. So if you were having 5 or 6 eggs, that would not be considered a lean source. But dairy, low fat, Greek yogurt.
I love Greek yogurt.
Is incredible.
Yeah.
I should have offered that to you for lunch or breakfast. But those are all sources. And there's one more thing also to mention is this has taken a very long time to die, is this idea that dietary cholesterol increases overall blood cholesterol. They took cholesterol guidelines, or they took cholesterol recommendations out of the dietary guidelines in 2015. So when
2015, guys, that was not that long ago.
Cut back your red meat to reduce your blood level of cholesterol, that was taken out of the guidelines. I will also mention that shrimp has higher amounts of cholesterol. So there's the body tends to make a certain amount of cholesterol, and whether you have diet and exercise influence, but understanding that the body regulates these things.
Well, I want to just briefly, the one thing I did want to mention is you had mentioned these essential amino acids, and there's 9, and there's going to be, I heard from you, an EEA score that we might be able to look at.
That'd be incredible.
Is that something, tell me a little bit about that.
So they are working on this amino acid scoring system because it's very difficult for people to understand protein. Because again, protein is not, when you just look at the label, it just says protein, but it is 20 different amino acids. And depending on the food that you choose, it's all a variety. And as a consumer, it becomes very difficult to understand, are we getting the individual amino acids that we need? Because if someone has a parasitic infection, you're going to need a higher amount of lysine You would never be able to look at the back of a label and be like, oh, well, I need 2.2 grams of lysine. So this EAA9 will give the consumer an ability to look at the label and say, okay, out of 100, this has a protein score of 99. And it's based on the limiting amino acids. It's not yet, it's called WISE code. It's not yet out there, but they're really working to bring this to the public.
I think that'd be helpful.
Helpful for everybody.
And I don't think we defined a limiting amino acid earlier. What is that?
Yeah, it would be the amino acid necessary for an action. For example, if we are looking at the limiting amino acid for leucine, we know that an individual will need about, let's say, 2.5 grams of leucine for this action of muscle protein synthesis. In a meal, if you give them collagen, then let's say leucine is the limiting amino acid in that profile of that food. So that would be a limiting amino acid in real time.
What does your average day look like?
Well, I had for breakfast what I gave you, which was frittatas. So egg frittatas with a little bit of turkey in there and some vegetables. I might have 40 grams of protein in that frittata. For lunch, I'll probably actually have some Greek yogurt. And I use these Greek yogurt bars. I'll probably have 2 of those and maybe a slice of turkey bacon or beef jerky. And then I'll probably have one more snack. And that'll probably be berries and some kind of protein source. But that snack is actually going to be lower in protein, probably higher in carbs. And then dinner will be steak with some kind of carb and some kind of vegetable. But overall, I eat around 120 grams of protein a day. I'm a very small. Were you surprised at what a small human I am?
Yes.
Everybody says that. That's like the first thing they say. Oh my gosh, you're so small. But that's what I would typically have.
Okay, that's awesome. And I know we didn't talk too much about training, but maybe just your most important thing that you think people need to take away about resistance training.
It's non-negotiable and it's not interchangeable. Either you're doing resistance training or you're not. And there's many modalities of exercise that are great, but you have to prioritize resistance training if you want to age well.
And 2 days a week is enough.
It is.
So just 2 days, an hour?
Yes. So basically we would think hitting all your muscle groups and that rep range. Again, if you are untrained, then you can get away with a lot and still see improvement. But I hate to say this, some of the earlier studies that I worked on, it was 2 days a week of bodyweight exercises was enough to maintain their tissue and actually improve their lean tissue.
So maybe just starting with that and then work your way up.
Yeah.
Because you can do that at home.
Exactly.
You can get a band. You can.
But I want to encourage people to, because again, we are counteracting aging. And it's interesting because when you're young, you have so much flexibility from a nutritional standpoint and a physical standpoint. But as you age, you actually have to work harder and more intense and more focused than you would otherwise. And that's kind of the time where we say, well, I've trained my whole life, now I'm going to rest. It's actually the opposite.
Train harder.
Yeah, actually have to train harder for the body to get a stimulus.
And yeah, ideally you need to be lifting some weights that are heavier than your body weight eventually, right?
Progressive
like you need
overload,
to work,
yes.
You got to work towards that.
Whether it's increasing volume or increasing weight, yes.
And there's so many online programs. You can get free programs, you can get paid programs, but yeah. So check them out. All right, so we end our podcast with a few questions we ask everybody. What is something that you learned in your life now that you wish you knew earlier?
That it's all going to work out.
I love that.
You know, it's all going to work out. No matter how it works out, it's going to work out.
What's a health hack or life hack that you haven't shared so far?
Training with your kids.
So
we don't watch TV together. I will have my daughter teach us yoga.
Oh.
So things that involve them that are active.
Yeah, during COVID, we found this superhero workout online.
Amazing.
And we would just do that together, and they loved it. It was so cute.
It's amazing. And so I think that there's just other ways in which you can create bonding.
What's a non-negotiable? Something you got to do every day.
Learn.
I love that. And then if you woke up tomorrow, you forgot all the training you have as a doctor, what would you do with your life?
What I'm doing now. I'd probably interview people.
I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I hope you guys love this podcast. Make sure to check out Dr. Gabrielle Lyon on her podcast, The Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show, on YouTube and Instagram. She is totally a wealth of information. If you're enjoying this content, do me a favor. Subscribe to my channel on YouTube or follow this podcast on your major podcast platform. And feel free to follow me on a variety of social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and more. And as always, remember to take care of yourself because you're worth it.